This is James Taylor, and you're listening to The Creative Life. The Creative Life podcast is a show created for you, the creative. If you're looking for inspiration, motivation, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's a musician, writer, artist, designer, performer, educator, or creative entrepreneur. They share their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, their insights, and much, much more. This episode is sponsored by C-School, the online school for creativity training. If you'd like to unleash your creative potential and access a free creativity blueprint training series, then just head over to c.school. That's www.c.school for your free training series. In this episode, I speak with Ahmad Munawar. We talk about generating leads for your business, creating a library of ideas, and writing great podcast monologues. Enjoy this episode. Hey there, it's James Taylor here, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Ahmad Munawar. Ahmad is the founder and chief marketing officer of Boutique Growth, where he helps boutique professional service firms generate more leads so they can win more business. He is also the host of Forecast, which is a marketing podcast for professional service leaders, where he interviews the brightest minds in marketing and business development. Ahmad's work has been featured in Professional Services Marketing Today, Duct Tape Marketing, the B2B Growth Show, and B2B Revenue Leadership. And it's my great pleasure to have him join us today. So welcome, Ahmad.
Thank you, James. Glad to be here.
So share with our listeners what's going on in your world just now.
Oh, there's a lot going on in my world. My coaching program is alive and well. Very busy working with clients, professional services firms, consultants, trying to get their marketing plans up and running, trying to help them win new business. My podcast is very busy, as you mentioned. So my twice a week podcast called Forecast, where I interview marketers, business development people, but also people that are building their own consulting or professional practice. I'm working on a daily podcast, which we were chatting about offline just now, hoping that'll go live sometime in the next couple of months. And I'm trying to figure out what to write a book on. In the early stages of writing a book, and that's certainly one of the more challenging parts of the process.
So, how did you get into this world? Where did the marketing kind of come into your life? How did you all get started on this?
Completely by accident, I think. So I actually started out my career as an accountant. I'm a chartered accountant in British terms, or a CPA in Canadian and American terms. I went to business school and focused on accounting really for no good reason at all, just that I thought I'd be able to get a nice job and make a lot of money out of it. And I did. I got a job at Ernst & Young, wore the nice suit, downtown office, big tower, fancy lunches, did that whole thing. But I realized early on that, accounting wasn't really going to do much for me from a fulfillment perspective. Along the way, I had kind of developed this interest in marketing and copywriting. And although I really didn't know if that could take me anywhere, I thought, well, hey, let me just try doing a few different things and see if there's some potential. So I started learning about copywriting and just kind of reading the blogs, reading the books, following the gurus, and I started testing out some skills with just a few not-for-profits that I had some interest in, helping them kind of rewrite their copy, write emails, write website copy, things like that. And over the course of that experience, I started to realize that marketing and copywriting was a little bit more interesting and fulfilling for me, and I saw myself making a career out of it. So from the big firm, I jumped into a small consulting firm as director of marketing, did that for about 5 years. And then eventually I felt I had learned enough and done enough to launch Boutique Growth.
So it's interesting. I mean, I've seen other people that have maybe moved from more math-based jobs, roles like accountancy or engineering. And often when they move into the marketing world, they'll go for the very analytical side of marketing, marketing being this huge area. But you went into what's often considered the more, quote unquote, it's the creative area, copywriting, developing marketing campaigns as well. Did you always have that very kind of strong sense of creative and having a big kind of picture in you?
Well, I think where I focus now in terms of my practice is on the strategy side. So my bread and butter is helping a professional service or a consulting practice develop a marketing strategy. And that is a very analytical exercise. And in many ways, although I hope I'm not making this up, but I feel like my experience as an accountant and the training that came with that did help me think more analytically. It helped me think more critically, and it gave me a process through which I engage with new ideas and I process new ideas, and I think that served me well. So in many ways, I think that that my skills as an accountant, as a CPA, has served me well in the marketing space.
So I know with many professional service owners, one of their big challenges is in lead generation. How to develop those leads, that new business. Maybe they've been focused primarily on the city or the place that they're based. They're wanting to expand a bit further as well. What are some of the common mistakes that you see that professional service owners make in really thinking about lead generation and developing some kind of plan on lead gen?
Oh, the simplest one is they don't do anything at all. Right? So while it is kind of that perennial issue, and everyone knows I need more leads to be able to win more business, but very few people take the steps to do something about it. And that's really the biggest challenge. And in my opinion, the best way to grow a practice is to generate more leads. There's certainly other things you can do. You can work on your pricing. You can work on your strategy. You can work on your target market. You can do all those things. And I help clients do all those things. But if you're not bringing in leads and building a pipeline and having more conversations, then all of those strategic questions are going to be answered in a vacuum. Whereas what you want to do is you want to be having more conversations with prospective clients, letting those conversations fuel your learning about the market, about what you do, about the offering, and then feeding that learning into a strategy. So lead generation and strategy, in my mind, go hand in hand. You can't do strategy without conversations, and you can't have conversations without leads.
Now, whether it's kind of the strategy side or the lead generation side, it does require you come up with, you obviously look at the data, but you come up with new ideas based upon that information that you're bringing in. Where do you go to get inspiration? How do you go about looking for new ideas potentially for your clients, and then how do you go about having some kind of structure in order to develop those ideas for them or for your own business?
Yeah, great question. So I'll tell you what I do, and I think that's illustrative for anybody to be able to follow. So I have two broad sources of ideas. There's the people that are publishing in my space, and my space being marketing, sales, business development, business strategy more loosely. I'm following the people that are writing the books, they're writing the blogs, they're publishing the podcasts, and I'm following the people who are approaching the topic in a way that resonates with me, right? Because there's a lot of people talking about these things. Most of them I don't like, right? But some of them really click with me, and they're reflective of my approach. And I'm following them, first of all, to know what's being said in the marketplace. That's important, right? That when I put a message out into the marketplace, it's not a vacuum, right? There's other messages being fed into that same marketplace, and my audience is listening to all these messages. So I need to know what's being said so I can figure out how to navigate that jungle and enter into it with my own idea. That's one. The second is consuming other people's content, listening to their ideas helps me better formulate my ideas in terms of how my ideas will stand out from the pack, how they'll resonate with people, and in the end, that makes my ideas better. At the same time, I do my best to consume content and expose myself to ideas from other industries that are not related to marketing, not related to business development, sometimes not even related to business. So, personal development, creativity, productivity, social sciences, anthropology, social sciences. I mean, honestly, some of my best ideas have come from disciplines that have nothing to do with business. And that's been quite helpful.
I guess, one of the things about that is, obviously, in marketing, the tactics change all the time, but human psychology doesn't really change. It's this, we're kind of hardwired into us to some of those things that you talked about. Learning a bit more about how the human brain works, learning about how personal development works, can lead very nicely into developing marketing strategies.
Well, this is the thing that I'm a little bit obsessed with right now. So I've been reading Ryan Holiday's new book, Perennial. More into it, but I'm certainly intrigued by the idea of how to build things that stand the test of time. And it seems like Ryan's really done something pretty incredible with that book. And I think that's what any creative person should be concerned about, right? Is you don't want your ideas to sit on the shelf for a couple of months or even a couple of years and then be forgotten. You want to make sure that all that time and that energy and that attention that you've given to your creative project will stand the test of time and be consumed and will benefit people for years and years to come.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point, especially for many authors listening. We had an author on recently, actually based in Canada, where you are in Toronto, Michael Bungistania, and he wrote a book called The Coaching Habit, and he said he went into it with the concept of, I want to write a classic in the field, which in this case it was coaching. And so he knew that as a result of writing a book like that, in terms of marketing a book like that, he wasn't going to have the big spike, maybe the New York Times bestseller, but he wanted to ensure that he had a marketing plan that was going to be a 3-year marketing plan, so it would continue to develop kind of some momentum for itself. And I think the last time I spoke to him, I think he sold about 250,000 copies now, and it's self-published, which for a self-published book is pretty good. But he had that that kind of perennial set, that idea of how to build a classic, how to build something for the long term.
That's interesting because that's one of the things that Ryan Holiday found, at least anecdotally, and I don't know how much data there is behind this, but he did mention that many of the perennial sellers throughout history weren't terribly popular in the beginning.
Yeah.
Like there wasn't this massive spike, but it was more of a gradual rise to the top over the course of years and decades.
Which I know it goes against a lot of the stuff that you hear today, especially in the marketing world, about launches and creating a big impact initially at launch. So it's a kind of can sometimes be a slower burn there. So you've kind of gone through this kind of creative journey and this path in your own career. And then you started doing the podcast. So what was the initial impetus for doing the podcast, and the way that you started doing the podcast, the type of podcasting that you wanted to do?
Yeah, so the impetus behind the podcast was, by then I had been running my firm Boutique Growth for a couple of years, and I had been pretty successful at writing. I wrote my own blog, I had an email newsletter, and I was writing for some of the larger publications in my space as a guest writer, and I enjoyed writing. But I couldn't ignore podcasting as a medium. And I think yourself and certainly your listeners are familiar with podcasts, and you see the power in this as an intimate medium to share ideas and to build an audience. I mean, there's really nothing video is powerful too, but if you compare an article to listening to a podcast episode, the level of intimacy and the kind of relationship you can build is just you can't compare the two. So I just couldn't ignore it anymore. And a lot of the folks that I was following in the marketing space were really bullish on podcasting, and I drank the Kool-Aid to a certain extent. So I launched the podcast, and what I heard was that when you launch, your first 100 episodes or so are just going to suck. And actually, there's one particular podcast I listen to religiously, one of the copy blogger podcasts on Rainmaker FM. It's called Rough Draft. It's now, they're not publishing anymore, but the gentleman who hosted Rough Draft, he started with four times a week monologues for the show. And his logic was, look, if I'm going to suck for the first 100 episodes, and that's where I heard that, then I don't want to suck for like 2 years on a weekly show. Right? Like, who wants to suck for 2 years, right? I'd rather suck for like 6 months. So let me do 4 episodes a week, get to 100 as fast as possible, let it suck, and then it'll get better and things will get more interesting. So I applied the same kind of logic. I started with 3 episodes per week, strictly monologues, and I was looking to achieve 2 things. One, get really good at the craft and the art of podcasting as fast as possible. And secondly, develop a library of ideas that hopefully would serve me well for years and years to come. So if I'm doing 3 episodes a week, then pretty soon I'm going to have this huge volume of content that can sit on my website. People can consume it, they can benefit from it, and I can point to it, as time goes forward. So that was the idea. And
with the monologue, a bit similar to when you write a blog article, I suppose it makes you have to refine your thinking and really kind of dig into your thinking, which maybe some other types of mediums don't necessarily make you do. So you really had to kind of clarify your own thinking about particular subjects. Yeah, I mean, I could tell you the process of developing a monologue was considerably painful. I mean, it was really, really hard, much harder than I ever could have anticipated. Initially I was scripting them kind of word for word because I couldn't get on the microphone and just wing it or just go off the cuff.
I wasn't sharing valuable content that way, and it wasn't coming across properly. So initially I scripted it. And if you listen to the early episodes of Forecast, it was very robotic. The content was good, but it was coming out very robotic. And then over time, I got more comfortable with kind of a loose outline, a loose script that I'd put down on paper. But then when I would talk, I would be a little bit more, I'd improvise more. I'd go off the cuff more, go on tangents more. And what I found was that, although sometimes that was a little bit divergent from the topic, it helped keep things interesting, keep people's attention. But certainly, getting up that learning curve of releasing a monologue was very, very challenging.
So this idea of coming up with twice weekly or kind of monologues, that requires a huge amount of not just speaking the monologues, but the writing, the ingesting information, thinking deeply about that as well. I would imagine there's a danger of burnout with doing that. Unlike something like this, which is as a conversational interview, we kind of go back and forth. And I know for me as an interviewer, it takes some of the pressure off. I know speaking to some guests, they say it takes they don't feel as pressurized this way. So with the monologue, did you get to that point where you got up of a day and think, I've got to write this monologue, and I have nothing to say. I just can't think of what to say.
Yeah, that's precisely what happened. So when I started, I felt like I was over-consuming and underproducing. I read a lot, I consumed a lot of information, and I was writing a little bit, but I felt like I had more to say than I was giving myself an outlet for. And so that's what really excited me about the 3 times a week monologue in the beginning is like, I'm going to get all these ideas out there. I've got so many things, percolating in my mind. And although it's going to be challenging, this is my opportunity to get them out of my head and into the world where they should be, right? And I did that. And 50 episodes later, the well ran dry. And I was like, I don't know what else to talk about. I've talked about all these things, and I just completely depleted my resources. And because I was so focused on production, 3 times a week is a lot of content. That was hours every week spent producing. I didn't have a whole lot of time to consume anymore. And I learned the hard way that, consumption fuels production, right? I need to be consuming ideas, consuming content, making sense of them in my head, and then packaging my own ideas based on that and putting them out in the world. You can't produce without a really solid consumption habit. And I learned that the hard way.
And I think that thing you described there, which is getting up and just not feeling inspired, maybe having a block over what you're going to create is something that many people, regardless of what the creative work is that they're doing, they experience at some point, usually many points in their work life and in their careers as well. Was there anything it sounded like first of all you took a break, took a refresh, try to get that balance better about in terms of consuming, so you could fill up that well again. Were there any other things that you did to be able to kind of get you in that state where the ideas would flow again for you?
Yeah. So what I did was, I think this is an important point, because any creative project, you're going to have that moment where you hit a wall. And I'm very fortunate because a lot of podcasters hit that wall after 10 or 15 episodes, right? I hit the wall after 50, which is great. I mean, I went pretty far initially, but then I hit the wall. I was no longer sure what this thing was about. I was no longer sure how to proceed, what to do with it, and I was just a little bit disengaged from the whole thing. So instead of, the tendency might be to just scrap it all together, call it a failure, and move on to something else. But I was pretty confident that I had something here. I just wasn't really sure what it was. And that wall was my opportunity to really reevaluate what this thing was about and what I wanted it to achieve. And I came out of that evaluation with a solution that I would continue with the monologue, but I'd reduce it to once a week. And then I would add a second episode that was an interview. And I'd go and I'd talk to folks who were in my space. Many of the folks that I was reading and that I was following otherwise, I'd go and I'd have interviews with them, have conversations with them, and begin to engage with their ideas. And the hope is that their ideas would help spawn more ideas of my own. Yeah. And that worked like a charm. That's really how I got out of the hurdle there. And
I mean, I do the same thing here with this podcast. Every week I interview maybe 3 different guests, and then I film a video show once a week as well. And very often I'll be sitting there at the start of the week, and the video goes out on a Friday. I'll be sitting at the start of the week really unsure what's going to be in that Friday video episode. And through a conversation like this, it will lead, or maybe, oh, that's interesting. You just talk about Ryan Holiday. I remember interviewing Ryan a couple of years ago for a show, and maybe let me re-explore some of those ideas. It just kind of gives you that little impetus. Your antennae is up, and these things are feeding into each other.
And this is why I think podcast interviews in particular are such a powerful strategy, because it's one thing to, read the books, read the blogs, follow the people in your space. It's a whole other thing to have a direct conversation with them. Right. Yeah. It's just such a rich exchange. And if you go ahead and you interview, I don't care what field you're in, if you go ahead and interview the top 30, 40, 50 people in your space, you're going to learn a ton. More than you ever could by reading books or reading articles.
Yeah. And also I know for many of them, especially many of the authors we have that come on here on the show, and they write their book, and then many books goes out, and it's kind of this work that's kind of set in stone sometimes, but their ideas don't stop there. They continue to think about them, and many times they come on the podcast, we initially start talking about things in the book, but then they have something that they're continuing, an idea. They're saying, actually, I really wish I'd put this in the book as well. I really wish that this was the next stage I wanted to write about. And this is maybe going to be the idea, the germination for the next book as well. So I think what you're doing is great. You've obviously kind of identified that identifying that kind of blend for you, and what you've done in terms of kind of going through those episodes so quickly in that way is obviously you're developing those skills, which is great. And I think if any. There was that, I'm trying to remember the name of the This American Life, the guy that does This American Life, where he has that great quote, and he says something along the lines like, when you first get started, your taste is really good, and you're really disappointed in your work because your taste is really good and the stuff you're putting out kind of sucks. But gradually over time, you look to reduce that gap between, and it sounds like what you've been doing there is you're just kind of gradually kind of reducing that gap and finding ways to be able to do that.
Yeah, Ira Glass, and I lived by that quote for the first 50 episodes, because I was looking at my work and I said, I don't like it, but I know what good work looks like. So Ira's voice was head the whole time.
Fantastic. So we haven't kind of spoken so much about kind of resources or tools or apps. Do you have any online resources or tools or apps you find particularly useful for the work that you do, maybe in the podcast or for your writing or the other projects you have on the go just now?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a laundry list of stuff that I use. So certainly Gmail for email. I use Evernote to capture ideas. I've got Evernote on my phone. Anytime something comes to mind, as crazy as it is, it goes into Evernote. If you review my Evernote folders and you look at some of the stuff in there, I mean, it looks like I'm schizophrenic. It's all over the place, right? But I'm very kind of militant, if you will, about capturing ideas as they come. So quite often they're audio notes or sometimes they're text and whatnot. I use Trello for project management, as well as Basecamp, Slack for communication, Skype for podcast interviews, and Scrivener for writing articles and podcast episodes and book manuscripts and so on. Yeah,
I mean, we're big. All those tools you just mentioned are the same tools that we use here. They're just great, and many of them work very well together. And if you could recommend just one book to our listeners and also one record or album to our listeners, what would they be?
So unfortunately, I'm not much of a music listener, so I don't have a record or album to recommend, but I do have a book, and that's Linchpin by Seth Godin. I have to say, this is just, I mean, there's a lot of good books out there, and many of them are written by Seth Godin, but this is the one book that really changed my view on work and career and craft. Because what Seth essentially said in that book was, it's one thing to be good at what you do. It's one thing to have skills and talents and expertise, and that's great. But if you're not willing to exert the emotional labor of bringing new ideas into the world, helping people interact with those ideas, and then helping folks, achieve something or change something through your ideas, then you're not going to go very far. So that was a monumental book in my journey.
Great writer as well, Seth Godin. And we're going to have all these links on the show notes. If people go to jamesdale.me, and you'll find all of these links here as well. So a final question for you here, Ahmad. Let's imagine you woke up tomorrow morning and you had to start from scratch. So you've got all the tools of your trade, all the knowledge that you've acquired over the years is still there, but no one knows you. You have to restart. What would you do? How would you restart?
So I'm going to give you the marketer's answer, which is not very sexy, but I think it's effective. And that is, I would call 100 people that I believe need my help. They need something that I have. They need something that I can deliver. I would interview them. I wouldn't try to sell them anything. I wouldn't try to pitch them anything. I would just talk to them to better understand what their needs are, what they're struggling with within the scope of my area of work or expertise. I'd then take all that data and I would develop a simple offering. And I go back to them and I would say, you said you needed help with this. Well, here's how I can help you. Are you interested? That's it. Very simple and great advice. I mean, it's so often the case that we kind of put things out to the world without actually asking people, is this what you want? You know, it sounds really simplistic what you just said there, but I know, having seen many people in different walks of life and different businesses, how incredibly effective that is as well. Ahmad, it's been a pleasure speaking to you today. Where's the best place for people to go now so they can check out the podcast, read the blog, and learn about your other kind of products and programs? Yeah, so you can check out my firm at boutiquegrowth.com. You'll find the podcast there. You'll find a free course that I have on lead generation for professional service or consulting firms. That's boutiquegrowth.com. Fantastic. We'll have it on the show notes as well. Ahmad, thank you so much for coming on today. I wish you all the best. I'm really looking forward to seeing how the podcast develops and how you kind of get that blend. And I wish you many, many happy years of podcasting in the future. Thank you so much, James. Hey, James Taylor here again. And if you're interested in living a more creative life, then I'd love to invite you to join me as I share some of the most successful strategies and techniques that high-performing creatives use. I put them all together in a free downloadable ebook that you can get by going to jamestaylor.me. That's jamestaylor.me to get your free downloadable ebook on creativity.